Title: America's Most Chilling Unsolved Case. The Children Who Vanished in the Fire Intro. On Christmas morning 1945, the Sodder family home was just a smoldering pile of ash. 5 of their children were gone. The official story: they died in the fire. But if that's true, why were their bodies never found? This is the story of the children who vanished into the smoke, and the haunting idea that they didn't die, they were stolen. Section 1. Christmas Eve, 1945. It's 1945 in Fayetteville, West Virginia. The war in Europe was finally over, and a spirit of celebration was in the air. For the Sodder family, this was especially true. George Sodder, an Italian immigrant who built a successful trucking business from scratch, and his wife Jenny had 10 children. Their large 2-story house, just outside of town, was bursting with life and Christmas excitement. Their oldest son, Joe, was away in the army, but the other 9 kids were home for the holidays. On Christmas Eve, the older children, 14-year-old Morris, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, who was 5, begged their mom to let them stay up late. Their big sister Marion had just brought them new toys, and they couldn't wait to play. Around 12:30 a.m., the phone rang, waking Jenny. She went downstairs to find a woman on the line she didn't know, asking for a man she'd never heard of. In the background, she could hear laughter and clinking glasses, like a party. She wrote it off as a wrong number and hung up. Before heading back to bed, she noticed the kids had left the lights on and curtains open. She fixed both, assuming the 5 children were now sound asleep in their attic bedroom. It was the last peaceful moment that house would ever see. Section 2. The fire. Just an hour later, around 1:30 a.m., Jenny woke up again, this time to the smell of smoke. She realized with horror that the house was on fire. Thick black smoke was pouring from George's office. She awoke George, and they scrambled out into the frigid night with 4 of their children, Mary and 3-year-old Sylvia, and their 2 older sons. But 5 of their children were still trapped on the top floor. Panic kicked in. George rushed to grab the ladder he always kept propped against the side of the house to get to the attic window. But it was gone. Not just misplaced, it was later found tossed down an embankment some distance away. His next idea was to pull his 2 big coal trucks up to the house and climb on top of them. He ran to start them, but neither engine would turn over, even though they'd both worked perfectly the day before. Frantic, Marion sprinted to a neighbor's to call the Fayetteville Fire Department, but the phone line was dead. Another neighbor saw the blaze and tried to call from a nearby tavern, but also couldn't get a dial tone. It turned out the phone line had burned it, had been deliberately cut by someone who climbed 14 feet up the utility pole to do it. By the time the fire department finally arrived, it was 8 in the morning. The fire chief had to use a phone tree to round up volunteer firefighters, a process that took nearly 7 hours. The Sodder family home, and everything in it, had been reduced to ash. Section 3. The aftermath and a shocking discovery. As the sun rose on Christmas morning, George and Jenny Sodder stared at the ruins, believing they'd just lost 5 of their children. But their nightmare was far from over. When Fire Chief F.J. Morris and his crew finally searched the ashes, they sifted through the rubble for a couple of hours before he gave the grieving parents the news that would shape the rest of their lives. They found nothing, not a single bone or tooth. A few days later, on December 30th, the coroner's office issued 5 death certificates, citing the cause as fire or suffocation. The official story was that the fire had been so hot it had completely cremated the body. Jenny Sodder never believed it. She started her own experiments, burning animal bones in the garden to see if a fire could really destroy them. It couldn't. She even called a local crematorium, where an employee told her that human bones remain even after being heated to 2,000 degrees for 2 hours, far hotter and longer than their house fire. In the ashes, they could still see recognizable parts of home appliances and the tin roof. How could all of that survive? But 5 children disappear without a trace. The family started to suspect this wasn't an accident. It was arson, meant to cover up a kidnapping. Mid-roll CTA, the official story was already falling apart, and the Sodders were facing a terrifying new possibility. What really happened that Christmas? If this mystery has you hooked, take a second to subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss the bizarre and disturbing clues that surface next. Section 4. The Unraveling Mystery. A series of strange events before and after the fire only deepened the Sodder suspicions. Months earlier, George, an outspoken critic of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, had argued with a life insurance salesman over his political views. The salesman had furiously warned him, "Your children are going to be destroyed, and your house is going to go up in smoke." In a shocking twist, this was the same man who served on the coroner's jury that ruled the fire an accident. Other weird things started to add up. A neighbor saw a man watching the younger Sodder children from the road as they walked home from school. A passerby driving through Fayetteville late on Christmas Eve claimed to have seen people throwing balls of fire at the Sodder house. And after the fire, a small, hard rubber object, looking like part of a napalm-style bomb, was found in the yard. Then came the sightings. One woman watching the fire claimed she saw some of the children peering out of a car that sped past as the house burned. A woman working at a tourist stop 50 miles away said she served breakfast to the kids the morning after the fire, noting they were with 2 men and 2 women of Italian extraction in a car with Florida license plates. A week later, a hotel worker in Charleston reported seeing the same group, and said the adults got angry when she tried to talk to the children. Section 5. A lifelong search, convinced their children were alive. George and Jenny spent the rest of their lives looking for them. They left the property as it was, turning the site into a memorial garden that Jenny tended for the rest of her life. In 1952, they put up a huge billboard on Route 16 with the faces of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. They hired a private investigator, C.C. Tinsley, who dug up even more disturbing information. He heard a rumor that Fire Chief Morris had found something in the ashes, a human heart. When confronted, Morris led George to a spot where he'd supposedly buried it in a metal box. But when they had it examined, it was identified as fresh beef liver that had never even been near a fire. Maurice later admitted he planted it, hoping that finding any remains would bring the family closure and stop their questions. In 1949, George organized his own excavation with a pathologist from Washington, D.C. They discovered a few small bone fragments, which were identified as human vertebrae. But a report from the Smithsonian Institution delivered another shock. The bones belonged to one person, likely between 16 and 22 years old, and showed no signs of being in a fire. It was concluded they were probably mixed in with the dirt George brought in to build the memorial garden. Section 6. The photograph from Kentucky then. In 1968, over 20 years after the fire, a letter showed up, addressed to Jenny and Sodder. Was a photograph of a man in his mid-20s who looked strikingly like their son Louis would have. On the back, a cryptic message was scrawled. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. ILO boys a 90132. This one picture reignited their hope. The Sodders hired another private investigator to go to Kentucky, where the letter was postmarked, but the investigator took their money and vanished. The family was afraid to publish the full message or return address, fearing it would put their son in danger. Instead, they updated the billboard with the new image of the man they were sure was Louis, hoping he'd see it and finally come home. He never did. Conclusion. George Sodder died in 1969, never finding out what happened to his children. Jenny, who wore black in mourning every day after the fire, passed away in 1989. The famous billboard came down soon after. Sylvia, the last surviving Sodder child who was in the house that night, passed away in 2021, holding on to the promise she made to her parents to never let the story die. To this day, the case of the Sodder children is officially unsolved. Was it a tragic accident and a badly handled investigation, or was it a calculated kidnapping, maybe by the Sicilian mafia as payback for George's anti-Mussolini views? Did the kids survive that night, only to be taken away and raised under new names, maybe even sent back to Italy? Or did they escape the fire and die out in the wilderness? The 5 Sodder children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, are frozen in time. Their faces still stare out from those old photographs, their faces lost to the smoke of that Christmas so long ago. The fire is out, but the questions still burn. CTA, what do you think happened to the Sodder children? Share your theories in the comments. And if you want to explore more of history's most haunting unsolved mysteries, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.